Stay. Stay. That's a good boy. Thanks. Much obliged. I recognize your face. We met at the park recently. You mentioned my pup was a real looker, didn't you? You have my pet. My pup. You struck him. Look, you want the animal, give me 10. Simple as that. When the mutt starts making noise, I'll crack its head open with a rock. You actually blasted him. He intended to harm our pup. Said in Brooklyn, an introverted drink server named Bob Saginowski stays solitary while employed at a tavern run by his kin, Marvin Stippler, which serves as a frequent stash spot for the Chechen mob's illicit gains. Bob lives a muted, melancholy, and predictable existence. Late one night, Bob spots some fellows honoring their neighborhood pal Richie Glory Days Whelan, whose killing remains a mystery, so he provides a free round to express solidarity. Soon, Marvin draws Bob away to warn him about offering complimentary beverages to an elderly resident named Millie, who constantly leaves her bill unpaid despite lingering over drinks every single evening. This news upsets Bob since he feels for the isolated lady and attempts to argue for her, but it gets him nowhere. Eventually, Bob wraps up his work, locks the doors, and treks home, relishing the stillness of the evening and his own thoughts. Several days afterward on Sunday, Bob visits the nearby chapel, takes a rear seat for the service, then exits in silence without interacting, slipping back into his habitual pattern. Following a shift one night, Bob exits the tavern and treks home. Shortly after, Bob catches odd noises and pauses, attempting to locate where they originate. He tracks the commotion to a garbage bin sitting on someone's front yard, peers inside, and feels stunned to discover a mangled little pup crying within. As Bob examines the animal more carefully, the resident, a server called Nadia Dunn, walks up warily, asking why a random man is rummaging through her refuse. Once the injured canine catches her eye, Nadia's guard drops and she suggests Bob carry the creature into her flat so she can provide aid. Once indoors, Nadia skillfully washes the pup, bandages its injuries, and mentions her past employment at a rescue center where she gained canine care experience. After finishing the treatment, Nadia begins collecting cages, playthings, and kibble for Bob to borrow until he can purchase his own supplies. Yet unfamiliar with such obligations, Bob gets overwhelmed and suggests the pound until Nadia points out it might just suffer more abuse elsewhere, urging him to take responsibility instead. Bob pauses to rethink his position, still wishing to dodge the chore by asking Nadia to host it though. He quickly learns she's unable to take it because her night shifts leave her with no time for its care. Thus, Bob feels torn between maintaining his solitary existence and the first OT, unusual urge to help the helpless creature, a feeling that catches him off guard. Only for the weekend, maybe 2 days, I'm begging you? Fine. The following afternoon, Bob tells Marvin about the battered pup, describing his stress and indecision regarding adopting it. Finding his normally stoic relative's distress funny, Marvin notes it's merely an animal and tells him to chill out and trust his intuition. At the same time, across the pavement, 2 crooks named Bree and Fitz watch the establishment closely. It serves as a collection spot, though not this evening. Once the patrons clear out, the thieves burst in. Are you out of your minds? Do you have any clue whose funds you're grabbing? Obeying the gunman's commands, Marvin clears the till and passes the money over. The moment the thugs depart, Marvin and Bob hunt for their co-worker, Rardy, discover him severely injured, and contact the authorities and medical services. Eventually, officers show up and identify Bob from the parish. A detective from the NYPD named Ivandro Torres speaks with Bob, who mentions seeing a shattered timepiece on one of the suspects. Impressed by the server's sharp observation, Detective Ivandro records the detail and proceeds with his questions. What was the total loss? Just whatever the drawer held. Frustrated that the building's surveillance cameras are mere decoys, the investigator finishes his inquiry and heads out. Marvin rips into Bob once they're alone, questioning why he'd blab about the watch to the investigator. Marvin then expresses gratitude that the Chechens collected their funds prior to the heist, but notes that even so, since the Chechens control the place, they'll be livid about the breach. Powerless to change things, the pair shutters the venue and goes their separate ways. The following day, Bob hesitantly heads over to Nadia's place for the animal, admitting he's completely out of his depth. Eager to assist, Nadia jumps into Bob's vehicle, and the pair drives to a local pet store where she guides him through picking out essential supplies. Bob decides to call the pup Rocco, and they pick up a custom-engraved collar. Afterward, Nadia suggests a guidebook to help him master the basics of canine care. Bob drops Nadia off at her place, expresses his gratitude, and heads home to help Rocco settle into his new surroundings. So, over the next several days, Bob spends every spare second bonding with Rocco and studying his needs. One morning, however, the leader of the Chechen crime family, Chivike, drops by the tavern to see Marvin and Bob, intending to make a terrifying impression of his power. He reveals a mangled man bound in the back of his van as a warning for failing to obey orders. Before the two can even react to the gruesome sight, Shvivka grills them regarding the heist, frustrated that they lack any clues about who would dare hit one of his spots. Even so, Shvivka delivers a harsh command before departing the scene. Locate my guy. Feeling bitter about being sidelined by the Chechens once they have gone, Marvin mutters under his breath about the mess they are in. In another part of town, Detective Avandro, fully absorbed in the investigation, coordinates with his colleagues to officially take charge of the file. Bob, meanwhile, stays calm and sticks to his usual routine, focusing all his energy on caring for his new pal Rocco, while an anxious Marvin stays home, staying with his sister Doye, who is now retired, while he tries to devise a strategy over several days. Eventually, Marvin has a secret rendezvous with Fitz. What is with his timepiece? If others spot it is broken, tell him to buy a replacement. Days later, Nadia spots Bob and Rocco at a park nearby and mentions she just lost her extra hours at the eatery. Since she has plenty of time now, she offers to dog-sit Rocco while Bob is busy at the bar. Relieved to have the help, Bob accepts and they swap contact info. Over at Marvin's place, Doy breaks the news that the facility looking after their father, who is currently on life support, is demanding funds. She worries he will be transferred to a low-quality home if they do not pay up immediately. When his sister desperately mentions pulling the plug, Marvin promises he will never abandon his dad and will find the cash no matter the cost. One sunny day, Bob and Nadia head to the park with Rocco, dedicating several hours to his obedience training. Later on, while Nadia is away for a moment, a guy named Eric Deeds walks up to Bob, praises Rocco without introducing himself, and then just walks off. Elsewhere, a stranger stops Marvin to ask for a way. He is convinced the Chechens are trailing him to apply pressure over the missing cash, yet he struggles to keep his cool. Eventually, Eric arrives at Bob's front door and, bypassing any formal greeting, enters the home to inform the bartender that Rocco actually belongs to him, claiming he has the paperwork to prove ownership. It lists a specific security chip ID. Have a look. Then, asserting his dominance, Eric ignores Bob's inquiries about his true intentions, swipes an umbrella from the stand near the entrance, and exits the apartment with it. Sometime later, Bob catches up with Nadia at a neighborhood cafe. As they open up to each other, Nadia admits to a past involving self-inflicted injuries during her drug use, but emphasizes she is sober now and moving forward. Bob offers his genuine empathy and encouragement. Later, he arrives at the bar to find Marvin looking completely frazzled. He just wanted directions. He stared at me. Look, I am no fool. While the two are hauling out the garbage behind the building, Marvin vents his anger about the Chechens seizing his business and treating him like a low-level staff member. Bob tries to convince his cousin to move past the decade-old takeover and find some peace. But mid-conversation, he notices a suspicious-looking bag dangling from a post and decides to check it out. Peering inside, Bob is stunned to find bloody currency paired with a severed limb still sporting the damaged timepiece from the night they were robbed. Bob shows the find to a revolted and trembling Marvin. He had specifically told Bry to dump that cursed broken watch. Now the physical proof of his own scheme is sitting right on his doorstep. Who delivered this cash? Have the Chechens figured out his play? Feeling his mind start to unravel, Marvin tries to stay logical, realizing that if the Chechens knew the truth, he would already be dead rather than standing there thinking about it. He takes a breath to figure out his next move. Bob remains surprisingly composed compared to his cousin and decides to take charge, declaring that they need to hand the money over to the Chechens to get the heat off of them. Much to Marvin's amazement, Bob stays calm and wraps the detached arm as if he were packing up holiday leftovers before getting ready to dump it. Does anything actually get under Bob's skin? Shortly after, Eric breaks the tense silence by entering the pub for a beverage. Shocked by the late visit, Marvin civilly turns Eric away and leads him to the exit. Time to move. Listen, Bob. Marvin then reappears and berates Bob for leaving the door unbolted during their illicit work, panicking over the thought of Eric catching them in the act. Even now untroubled by the brush with danger, yet irked by Eric's remarks, Bob promises his kin that their mystery remains buried and resumes his labor. Marvin quickly discovers that Eric is the individual insisting on Rocco's return. Confirming it is indeed Eric Deeds, he assumes Bob is uninformed and shares his knowledge about the man while cautioning him to stay on his guard. Bob absorbs the facts silently, seemingly skeptical of the killing stories, yet reflects internally. Giving space to a man boasting of a 10-year-old homicide is wise. Admitting the guy might be unhinged. Then, without losing any momentum, Bob gathers the severed limb and drives to a nearby lake to get rid of it. Meanwhile, a totally stressed Marvin stays behind. While fighting to stay composed, he meticulously cleans the bloody greenbacks for use. Simultaneously, over at the overpass, a steady Bob tosses the dismembered limb into the water, and while spending a moment with Rocco, Detective Evandro arrives to inquire about Glory Days, mentioning Eric's potential link to the vanishing. That is one fine-looking hound. Bob returns home to find Nadia outside, intending to walk Rocco. After saying sorry for being late, Bob questions her regarding Eric. Though Nadia insists she merely knows him through mutual friends, she becomes visibly agitated and defensive the moment his name is spoken, accusing Bob of attempting to manipulate her before storming away in a rage, which leaves Bob completely baffled. Baffled by the occurrences of the previous few hours, Bob enters his residence wishing to erase the memory, bonding with Rocco, his newfound closest friend. Eventually, Bob starts his work at the pub, and while prepping with Marvin, he mentions the strange chat with Nadia. Marvin soothes his relative alongside some regulars who are amused by Bob's romantic troubles, attempting to convince him she is the issue. Suddenly, this camaraderie is shattered by Shavka and his henchman Andrei's entry, sending the patrons running and leaving the pair to face the Chechens. When Shivka sits down, Marvin masks his terror, forces a grin to greet him, and offers his hand. Shavka brushes off the hand, avoiding Marvin's gaze, and gets right down to business with Bob, who is silently mixing up some beverages for the group of Chechens. Bob then boldly presents the damp cash to the men, expressing regret that they are still moist. Right then, Bob suggests a different cocktail, drops a curse word, and delivers a pitch, promising it is top tier. In the meantime, Marvin hangs back and watches the exchange, wondering how Bob stays so calm while talking normally, as if they weren't both standing at death's door. Bob, is this drink actually any good? Is it premium? Fortunately, the group likes the beverage. Just as they depart, Chivka issues fresh instructions. Andrei, you should sample this spirit before you go. In another spot, Detective Evandro speaks with Jimmy, questioning him on what happened the night Glory Days went missing. Jimmy explains that Glory Days exited the pub to purchase marijuana from Eric and his associate Tim, yet was never seen or heard from thereafter. The investigator processes the lead and carefully asks if Bob or Marvin are hiding something, though the query fails. Deep into the night, as Bob pulls into his driveway, he discovers Nadia at his front door waiting to offer an apology for her prior outburst, eventually admitting that she dated Eric against everyone's advice until his increasingly reckless behavior became far too much for her to bear. Bob tells her the past is irrelevant and insists she isn't to blame for Rocco's situation. As they spend time talking and bonding, Nadia mentions that Eric murdered Glory Days and is too dangerous to be near. Right, yeah, I believe I heard that too. Bob then reveals that he and Marvin were part of a crew in their younger years, doing shady, illegal jobs for extra cash until a more powerful criminal organization arrived and pushed them out of that life. To Nadia's great relief, Bob explains that he abandoned that criminal lifestyle long ago and simply works at the tavern now. Somewhere else, Marvin finds Fitz, who is paranoid since Bree died and won't enter Marvin's vehicle, fearing a setup. Irritated yet determined to soothe the jumpy fellow, Marvin allows Fitz to inspect the rear seats and the storage area to prove it's safe, eventually coaxing him inside before pulling away. You around? Uh-huh. Got it, sure. After Fitz settles, Marvin spills that he scouted the Super Bowl drop-off spot, pitching a heist against the Chechkins to settle the score for Bree. Repulsed by the reckless plan, Fitz vows to avoid such a deadly stunt given their history, leaving Marvin feeling let down. Marvin's vibe shifts. He demands total secrecy from Fitz before announcing he's pulling the job solo if he has to. Marvin requests that Fitz scout a safe house for him to lay low once the heist is over. Fitz agrees to track down a spot for his buddy. While they talk, the trunk lid pops wide open, Marvin snaps at Fitz for not latching it, parks, and tells him to go fix it. But things take a dark turn right as Fitz steps behind the vehicle to shut it. Marvin slams it into reverse and floors it, crushing him to death. He then ditches the car, sprints to his own ride, parked nearby, and vanishes. Talk about a backstabbing friend, right? Meanwhile, deep into the night, Bob escorts Nadia to her doorstep. Following a clumsy farewell, Bob heads back quickly, worried about leaving Rocco by himself. It's pretty clear the pup is now his top concern. Once inside, Bob says sorry to Rocco repeatedly and starts tossing him some treats, only to freeze when he notices the umbrella Eric swiped earlier, sitting right beside the dog, leaving him shaken and realizing the danger is escalating. Tomorrow, Marvin connects with Eric to figure out why he and his cousin are at odds. Why'd you ditch your pup? You trashed the poor thing and tossed it in the trash. Despite Eric's rambling making zero sense, Marvin plays on his insecurities by feeding him a bit of flattery. On another front, Detective Evandro acquires Eric's old mental health records and begins digging through them. Come sunrise, Bob heads over to Eric's place, aiming to smooth things over. But the volatile hothead just starts bullying the reserved bartender instead. Look, if you want the pet, give me 10,000. That's a bold demand. Even worse, before Bob can even get a word in, Eric boasts about getting away with murdering Glory Days, hinting he's ready to do it again. Fast forward a few days to Super Bowl Sunday. He swings by the house and runs into Doi, who's returning to work because she's broke. He gives her a kind hello as she gets ready to head out. He enters to find Marvin, who claims he's sick and skipping his shift, leading to a tense confrontation. Are you planning something reckless? Something we won't be able to fix this time around? Is Bob onto Marvin's heist plans? Once Bob is gone, Marvin sits there, boiling over how he was just treated. He can't believe Bob's lack of respect for his legacy as a local bar owner, and he has to take a breath so he doesn't snap. In the meantime, Bob gets back, spends a little time with Rocco, and gets ready for work. Knowing tonight will be brutal, Bob grabs his weapon and a roll of bills before heading out with the rookie. Over at Nadia's, Eric forces his way in. Finding the place empty, he starts rehearsing what he'll say to get his ex on his side. As time ticks by, he grabs a bite to eat and settles in to wait for her. Just sit your butt down and hear me out. Fine, but then you're leaving. Back at the pub, Bob maintains his post and braces for the year's biggest rush. As the hours pass, fans flood in, ready to drink and watch the big game. Pretty soon, Bob and Rudy are swamped with endless drink orders. Following instructions, Bob sneaks cash-filled envelopes into the safe whenever he gets a breather, holding them for the Chechkins. Back at his place, Marvin stays glued to his sofa, watching the game while feeling a strange sense of dread, like he's bracing for an impact. Later on, Bob is troubled to spot Nadia arriving with Eric, unsure if she's there of her own free will. Even though he's wary, Bob stays put behind the counter, keeping a close eye on them from a distance. Eric walks right up to the counter for a beer and pulls Bob aside for a quiet chat. Hand over that document first, then the cash is yours. Understood? Sure. But which note are we talking about? Marvin cuts their talk short by ringing Eric up to deliver a heads up. It's basic. Just arrive when scheduled, handle the business, and get out of there. At that moment, Marvin, standing up and looking ready to head out, tells Eric to keep his cool. He sets a meeting for past 12 and ends the call. Back at the tavern, while the crowd watches the match, Bob keeps a sharp eye on Nadia from a distance as he slickly locks away the illegal cash into the vault. Eventually, the broadcast finishes and the patrons head out, gradually making their way back to their houses. The atmosphere inside grows heavy and silent, leaving just Nadia, Bob, and Eric behind. Then, Nadia steps up to the counter. Just as she starts to clear things up, Eric cuts in to steer the talk elsewhere, acting like they've had a joyful reconciliation. Fortunately, Eric heads outside to answer a phone call shortly after, allowing Bob and Nadia a moment to talk. I found him sitting inside my place upon returning home. Before long, an edgy Eric comes back to the counter to order another round of liquor. Bob calmly serves the unstable guy his drink and passes over the $10,000 he insisted on for Rocco. Surprised by the quick payoff, Eric flips through the stack of bills, shrugs it off, and suddenly drops a bombshell. We ought to check the safer tool too. Completely unmoved, Bob firmly denies Eric access to the Chechen's funds and shuts him down. Growing increasingly restless by the minute, Eric frantically asks for Marvin's whereabouts, explaining that he needs to stay informed of his arrival to prevent any unexpected interruptions during his mission, which he only has a few moments to finish. With odd composure, Bob begins sharing stories from his cousin's history, mentioning that 10 years back, Marvin worked as an illegal lender and gave a neighborhood youth thousands, which the boy couldn't possibly refund. Out of options, the young man went to Atlantic City to gamble and hit a $22,000 prize. Relieved, the boy came back and settled every penny he owed to Marvin, who spotted a shady chance to steal the entire windfall to settle his own massive debts with the Chechens. Marvin scrambled to hide the fact that the debt was paid, turning to his cousin to help bury the truth. This confession from the soft-spoken, nearly unnoticed barman leaves Nadia and Eric completely stunned and looking pale as death. But before they can even process that, the reality of the situation turns even darker. Pushing past his disbelief, Eric attempts to defy Bob by claiming responsibility for killing Glory Day. Yet, before the words are fully out, Bob guns him down right in front of a terrified Nadia. "You like hurting defenseless dogs? Creatures that can't fight back? I'm done with your games." While Bob explains his motives, a shaken Nadia nods along to his every word before tentatively asking if she can leave. Bob lets Nadia go, swearing to her that her safety is now guaranteed forever. "My lips are sealed, Bob. I'm certain of that." That's how deep Bob's facade goes. Out front, Marvin watches the place from afar, waiting for word from his associate, Eric, but instead spots Nadia sprinting away from the building, and his stomach ties in knots. Realizing his scheme has totally collapsed, he finally gathers his nerves and rings his cousin, who answers immediately. Yet, being aware of their mutual skeletons and the gravity of what just happened, Marvin and Bob both fall silent, sharing a moment of wordless understanding over the line. Once it hits Marvin that everything has gone south, he ends the call, filled with terror about what comes next. Marvin sits frozen in his vehicle, gripped by sheer panic as he realizes his fate is sealed. Sometime later, Bob cares for Rocco like it's just another normal day when the Chechens show up for their money. They spot Eric's corpse on the floor and demand an explanation from Bob. Trying to keep Nadia's name out of the mess, Bob claims that Eric showed up solo, drank too much while the match was on, and started causing a scene. Accepting the story, Chovka has his crew haul Eric away, convinced the guy got what he deserved before pulling Bob aside for a private talk. Chovka then hints that he knew Eric and Marvin were partners in the heist, expressing his deep contempt for Marvin's attempt to steal from him. He then casually mentions spotting Marvin waiting in his car nearby and executing him before arriving at the tavern. Reading nothing on Bob's stone-cold face, Chovka pledges his loyalty to the man whose kin he just eliminated, promising him backup. He concludes by asking Bob to take charge of the bar, even suggesting they rename the joint in his honor. "Strip his name away, install yours." Bob's Bar. Shaken by the startling update, Bob processes the info quietly and leaves. He reaches his residence later that night. Next, he serves Rocco, his silent confidant, some food and turns in for the night. Days pass until Detective Avandro finds Bob. He ignores the carjacking tale written in the police file about the death of Marvin. He expresses heartfelt pity toward Bob, noting the irony of Marvin being taken out just a few blocks from the pub, right in the turf where he once held sway. The investigator then mentions how Eric has gone missing, who was last spotted here mimicking the fate of Glory Days. He then explains that his checking confirmed Eric was actually in a psych ward when Glory Days' vanishing occurred, meaning he lacked any chance to kill him, only faking the deed to polish his brutal street image. Bob absorbs this news without a single flinch, casually agreeing that the detective might be onto something. With a sharp smirk, the official walks away. Later, Bob brings Rocco along to see Nadia at her home. Bob offers to disappear if Nadia desires, then asks for a walk. She weighs the choice, agrees, and slips back inside to find her outer lair, which leaves Bob absolutely beaming.